Hello, dear friends. Welcome back. Now we are beginning the course for the fourth week, and the theme for this week's classes is medicalization and demedicalization. And we will discuss many topics related to medicalization, demedicalization, and various viewpoints on these topics. This is a very interesting topic. Uh, the students of sociology might not have heard about this process, but that will be the advantage of reading Sociology of Health. So, in today's lecture, I have included the topic medicalization and introduction. And the concepts that I will cover today are definition of medical and medicalization, then nature of medicalization, and some of the criticism of this approach also. So now we move to the first slide. Here we will try to first define and understand the term medical, because the process of medicalization is related to meaning of the word medical. Now I have included certain definitions and etymological things related to the term medical. French or late Latin word medical or late Latin medicalis or Latin medicus basically suggests the meaning physician. And then mederi word suggests the meaning remedy or healing. So we can get an idea that as per the etymology, the word medical refers to either a physician or someone who is providing remedy or healing. Now, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, medical refers to of, relating to, or concerned with physicians or the practice of medicine. That means this dictionary is also giving a similar meaning which is coming from the etymological understanding of the word medical. And the first known use of the term medical also goes back to 1646 in the meaning defined above only. Then I have added one more meaning given by Cambridge Dictionary. Now, according to Cambridge Dictionary, the term medical is related to treatment of illness and injuries, or relating to medicine, or for the treatment of disease or injury. That means after going through the dictionary meanings and the etymological understanding, we can say that the term medical refers to some kind of either physician or someone who is dealing with remedy, healing, or treatment. And in this very sense, basically, we are making use of the word medical. However, in contemporary literature, the term medical is generally used to refer to the modern Western system of medicine. Now, the modern Western system of medicine is also referred as modern medicine, and we have been talking about this by making use of the term biomedicine, right? Now, interestingly, the term allopathic medicine is also used for this. However, this term is generally used by the practitioners of other systems of medicine and not the biomedicine. So now we have a clarity about the word medical, and now we will talk about medicalization. Now there are different definitions, and all these definitions basically highlight certain things. So we need to first go through some of these definitions. Now Conard says that medicalization describes a process by which non-medical problems become defined and treated as medical problems, usually in terms of illness and disorders. Now we need to focus here on certain words. like become, defined, and treated. If we read this definition again, we get an idea that medicalization describes a process. That means it is primarily a process which refers to or which talks about the becoming and defining and treatment of some of the non-medical problems as medical problems. That means medicalization refers to a phenomenon in which some non-medical problems are identified, defined, and becoming as medical problems. According to Turner, medicalization is defined as the way in which the scientific knowledge of medical science is applied to behaviors or conditions that are not necessarily biological. Now, here I have highlighted the word behaviors or conditions, and one more term which is important here is biological. That means if we follow Turner's definition, then it suggests that scientific knowledge of medical science is applied to behaviors or conditions that are not necessarily biological. That means if those behaviors are not biological, even then the medical science could be applied to those things, and this will become the process of medicalization. Medicalization is also seen as the process through which areas of everyday life have come under the purview of medical authority. Now, medical authority is basically related to some kind of institutional structure, right? So, within that institutional structure, if certain things are coming or becoming a part of that, then that will also be considered as medicalization. This concept was developed originally in the United States in the early 1970s and associated with the view of medicine as an instrument of social control. Now, when medicine was becoming very popular, and when I'm saying medicine, I'm actually meaning biomedicine. When biomedicine was becoming very popular, then it was becoming even an instrument of social control. Now, many people like Ivan Illich and then Michel Foucault, Irving Zola have talked about this process at that period of time. So, we will talk about those views later on. But as of now, because several people actually talked about these processes, and so the term medicalization became popular. Medicalization refers to the increasing influence of medical institutions and the medical profession, both the medical institutions and the medical profession, on aspects of life that previously had not been considered medical issues. So now it's becoming simple that there were certain things which were previously not considered as medical, and now those are identified as medical. For example, the disruptive behavior by children is now more likely to be defined as attention deficit disorder. That means when a child is basically not obeying the parents or getting involved in some kind of disruptive act or the acts which are generally not supposed to be performed by the child, then in normal circumstances that was considered as an undesirable situation kind of thing. But because of application of the term attention deficit disorder, and because of certain kind of suggestion to prescribe certain medicines and certain need of giving treatment, this behavior is becoming a medical behavior, or a medical terminology is applied to this. And that way, the disruptive behavior of the child is becoming a kind of illness that seeks some kind of treatment, and the name of the illness would be attention deficit disorder. So this is an example of medicalization. According to Cookerham, the concept of medicalization emerged from the intellectual and social turmoil of the 1950s and 60s. Now, why? Because of two important things, or in two important ways: as a critique of medicine for being authoritarian and imperialistic, and second, as a critique of the expanding role of medicine in the social control of deviant behavior. right? So this second meaning is also very important, that expanding role of medicine in the social control of deviant behavior. So as we stated that the behavior of the child might be considered deviant in normal circumstances, but a medical terminology is given to that. So that way, some kind of medical control of deviant behavior, that is the thing we are talking about. According to Conard and Schender, medicalization can occur on three distinct levels. That means how this process of medicalization is actually operating. We are talking about that. And then these authors suggest that at three different levels this may happen. One is conceptually, when a medical vocabulary is applied. Second is institutionally, when organizations adopt a medical approach to treating a problem in which they specialize. And third is at the level of doctor patient interaction, when a problem is defined as medical and medical treatment occurs. That means this third situation is saying that some sort of problem is there about which no prior understanding was there, and then when the person is interacting with the doctor, then because of the understanding of the doctor, a new kind of understanding is basically building up, and that particular situation is defined as a situation where some kind of medical intervention would be required. So the moment we are suggesting, that means the doctors are suggesting a kind of medical intervention to that specific problem, then that will become a kind of medical issue, and then that will be the process of medicalization. As these distinctions illustrate, the process often involves physicians and their treatment directly. That means whenever there is a situation of medicalization, there will be the presence of or the intervention of some physicians, that means some medical practitioners, and then some kind of treatment. Now, I would like to say here one important thing, that when these literature are making use of the term physicians, then it is not necessarily referring to only the people who are prescribing medicine, as we in India talk about that physicians and surgeons, right? Physicians refer to surgeons also in some of the academic literature because of the uses of the term in those contexts. So don't ever confuse that physician here means only the practitioners of medicine. The surgeons could also be included in some of those academic literature. So now we will see this again, as these distinctions illustrate, the process often involves physicians and their treatments directly. However, this is not necessarily so, as in the case of alcoholism, where the medical profession may be only marginally involved or not involved at all. Now, we can talk about one more example, that people who were excessive consumer of alcohol, then they were initially considered as deviant because they are not following the standard norms. But a new terminology was coined for that, and that was basically a kind of addiction or addictive behavior related to consumption of alcohol. So when addiction behavior is basically associated with consumption of alcohol, then it becomes a medical terminology. That means the habit of consuming alcohol excessively now became a kind of illness seeking a kind of treatment. So the moment the word addiction is used or added, it became medical, and for that a kind of de-addiction is suggested. So this de-addiction is a kind of treatment, right? So in this particular example, it is stated that the de-addiction might not need the intervention of the medical practitioners. So in certain situation, the kind of intervention required is not necessarily from medical practitioners, but the application of the word medicalization will be in these types of situations also, because a term or a situation which was earlier not considered as a medical is now becoming an issue of medical concern. Now, Conard and Schender, in their well-known book Deviance and Medicalization, From Badness to Sickness, attempted to identify the conditions under which behaviors are medicalized, pointing to a range of social forces such as the decline of religion and the entrepreneurial endeavors of pharmaceutical companies. That means Conard and Schender talk about a situation which was earlier identified as badness in the sense that that was not considered good for the society. So from this badness to sickness, that means the moment we are making use of the term sickness, that means there is a kind of medicalization. So when we were talking about badness, then that was actually an ethical consideration or maybe a religious consideration. But when it is becoming sickness, then it becomes a matter of medical consideration. So often from badness to sickness is an effort to somehow mitigate the role of religion or maybe ethics, and that way it shows the increasing authority of or power of the medical institutions or medicalization, and sometimes it also suggests the role of the pharmaceutical companies. We have talked about this process of pharmaceuticalization also toward the end of this lecture. Now we'll talk about nature of medicalization, that if medicalization is taking place in the society, then what is the possible nature of this process. Now, although not much has been stated by the nature of medicalization, but still few authors have tried to talk about certain things, and we have included those things in our presentation or the slides. One argument is that the expansion of medical jurisdiction is primarily a consequence of the medical profession exercising its power to define and control what constitutes health and illness in order to extend its professional dominance. Now, the word professional dominance is highlighted here. We need to understand the application of this term. When we are talking about nature of medicalization, then one of the arguments says that expansion of medical jurisdiction is primarily a consequence of the medical profession exercising its power to define and control. So both the things are there, defining it as well as controlling it, what constitutes health and illness. That means the medical profession is defining what is health, and at the same time the medical profession is controlling what is health. And why do they define and control? And the motive or the purpose is explained here as an effort to extend its professional dominance. That means the power of the medical profession is basically seen here, and that is brought into the focus. We have studied how biomedicine has acquired dominant position in the domain of healthcare and reduced the significance of psychosocial and environmental factors. Now, when we were talking about those different systems of medicine, then we had stated several times that biomedicine is not taking into consideration the psychological factors or the social factors or the environmental factors into consideration. Rather, this approach is focusing only on the biological factors, and so when the concept of medical is applied to certain situations, that means even if there is an existing explanation at the level of psychological factors or social factors or even environmental factors, but those kinds of explanations are actually discarded, and the biomedical explanation is basically supposed to find dominance, right? So this is one approach to understand the nature of the process of medicalization. And we have already studied the Marxist perspective. So if we want to understand this approach further, then of course we can take support from the Marxist perspective, because the Marxist perspective categorically talks about the power structure involved in the profession of medicine and the way this is working for promoting the interest of certain class, right? So that class may be defined in a specific way in specific situations, but this Marxist perspective can help in further interpreting this approach or understanding this approach. Now, why we are talking about the Marxist perspective here? Because this second situation, which is basically we are going to talk about, is very important, and for that basically a Foucauldian perspective is considered important for understanding that. So what is that second argument? Another argument considers medicalization to be the result of broader social processes to which doctors are simply responding. That means, according to this approach, there are certain types of processes going on in the society. And because of all those processes, a situation is building up in which medicalization is actually occurring. And so there is no conspiracy by the medical profession in this approach. And here we can understand the implications of this approach by applying the Foucauldian perspective. We talked about Foucault in one of the earlier lectures, and we will talk about the Foucauldian perspective in the context of medicalization also. And what is very important here is this, that medicalization is happening as a result of certain processes which are going on in the society. Now, there are different types of processes. Now, what are those processes? Some of these we will try to talk about in this lecture itself. Now we come to the criticism part, as the criticism part will help us to locate the things that we have discussed so far. First, medicalization of psychological conditions such as mental health because of emergence of psychiatry did witness severe criticism. So medicalization talks about basically some kind of reducing the impact of the non-biological or non-medical determinants. Now, many types of illness which were identified as mental illness, which were often considered that those were caused by the psychological conditioning of the people. Those conditions or those situations were basically, those situations came under the consideration of medical when psychiatry as a discipline emerged within biomedical sciences. And psychiatry says that the mental conditions or even the psychological conditions are actually determined by the biological conditions. So this approach of medical science was actually criticized vehemently because people had fair understanding about the psychological conditions, and the application of biomedical approach to understand those mental health related aspects was considered that this is basically a kind of over expansion of medicalization. So this became an important point of criticism. Then Ivan Illich and Michel Foucault did present extensive criticism of medicalization. Illich talked about the medicine caused illness and used the term iatrogenesis. We will talk about this process, iatrogenesis, in one of the lectures in this week only, but it would be necessary to say here that by this term, Illich wanted to talk about the situations in which the medicines cause certain harms to the people or the people who are making use of those medicines. And that is why Illich is talking about the medicine caused illness. That means when we are talking about excessive application of medical practices, or when we are making use of medicalization, then that often creates some kind of illness, and that can be a cause of some kind of disease also, and that is the process of heterogenesis. So sufficient it would be to say here that Illich has vehemently criticized the concept of increasing expansion of the world of medicine or medicalization. Just like that, Foucault was also critical to some of those processes, as we will discuss. Then we talked about the Marxist approach also. For Marxist, such medicalization is best seen as serving the interest of the ruling capitalist class. From this standpoint, the creation and manipulation of consumer dependence on medicine are merely examples of a more general dependence upon consumer goods propagated by that class. To put it in simple words, we can say that from Marxist perspective, this medicine world is creating circumstances and producing products which are to be consumed in the form of medicine, and those basically benefit the rich, or the proletariat are getting adversely affected by that, and the bourgeois are the beneficiary if we use the Marxian terms. And in simple words, basically the capitalist class are the beneficiary of that. Now, you may ask how this claim is made by the Marxist. Then we can say that many people basically seek some kind of medicines for getting extra energy. People who go for workout in gyms, they generally go for some types of energy drinks, and those are prescribed for the strengthening of the body. So the moment certain drinks are labeled as energy drinks, or the moment those are prescribed by certain health agencies, then that is basically the medicalization of the fitness process, medicalization of the a situation which could have been covered by good diet and healthy diet. So from a healthy diet to medically prescribed medicine, that is basically a process of medicalization, and in this process the manufacturers of those medicines are certainly the beneficiary. However, from a sociological perspective, case studies of medicalization have created new understanding of the social process involved in the cultural production of medical categories or knowledge. That means this study is very important. Medicalization as a process helps us to understand that how medical knowledge is actually produced, and how medical terminology are basically used, and how certain pharmaceutical and medical products are basically prescribed. And that is why this process of medicalization is very important. It is also considered important from the perspective of understanding the role of certain institutions which are often considered as the surveillance role or administering role, as pointed out by Michel Foucault. So, this is how we can talk about the concept and some of its criticism. Now we have come to the end of this lecture. These are some of the references and recommended readings. And before we close, here is the think about this problem. Can medicalization solve all health related problems for long? Can medicalization solve all health related problems for long. Think about it. And then one small activity question. Identify certain areas from our day to day life where medical intervention is unnecessary. So we can identify so many areas where medical intervention is necessary, but can we identify certain areas where medical intervention is unnecessary? And if you happen to find certain things, write a note on that. So thank you very much. We will meet in the next lecture. Till then, take care.